Welcome to Richer Soul, Elizabeth Ralph. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, let's start with the school thing because a lot of people I think are like, oh God, why didn't we learn this in school? Right. So I'll just leave that one because I didn't really learn it in school. Although I did go back to school for finance and take all of those, horrendous 8-hour exams and things like that. But that was an adult. As a child, really, I learned about money from my grandparents. My parents divorced when I was young, and so I kind of lived with grandparents, and I lived with aunts, and I lived with my parents on and off too. But the majority of the influence and the time was spent with my grandparents, and I was very fortunate. I had both of my grandfathers were very successful entrepreneurs, and one owned the largest electric cotton gin in the entire world at one time. And so he would take me in and show me the office and the all the machinery and the equipment. And so I was definitely like an eyes wide open, kind of child. And the other one really, really taught me a lot about saving and the other one really invested in land, but didn't necessarily invest in stocks or anything, but really didn't have any negative bias towards it. And then my mom actually ended up going back to school and becoming a financial advisor. So it was kind of the language was a little bit of an integral kind of thing. Somebody was always, getting out my grandfather would say, well, put the pencil to it. Anytime you wanted to make a decision, you're going to buy this business, you're going to, put the pencil to it, right? And he'd get out the little notebook with the pencil. So I would say it was normalized to me that you invested and that you bought nice things if you wanted them and you did all of these things. I would say it was a little bit of a situation where mm, money just wasn't something that was brought up as something that you would need to necessarily be concerned about. But it also wasn't like, oh, we're so wealthy that we're exclusive kind of people either. As a little bit of a middle ground. And I think that's really what has set me up to be in neutrality with money and to kind of have money flow through me. Now, when I got out on my own, of course, I went into credit card debt and, I had the car that wouldn't take me to work that had the blown up transmission. And not to say I haven't gone through that kind of stuff, but I didn't grow up with it.
And I find when you come from an entrepreneurial family,
Yeah.
money tends to be more of a practical conversation, just
Right.
because it becomes your everyday life. In as an entrepreneur, you've got to figure it all out and make payroll and do everything with regards to that. And so that becomes a big part of it. Out of curiosity, when you took all those finance classes and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
did they actually teach you how to build wealth? And did they teach you about the psychology of money, or was it more just practical math or something?
It was very math. I went through, there's a thing called a CFA where it's like quantitative math. And yeah, I went through all of that, but I worked on a trading floor. So I had to have all of that. And you had to know, a lot about just trading and options and things like that. So I would say really more of the building wealth stuff came from my own desire to buy my way out of corporate because while it was a wonderful job, I was really on track with my career even by the time I was 30, and I knew I could take it any direction I really wanted it to go. But I also knew that, I didn't want to be working in the matrix for, the rest of my life either. And so I better do something about it. So I started taking some of the money and I built my own wealth plan. Really just, at that point I was building financial models for the company. So I just built a financial model for myself. Actually on the airplane home from Australia, I built a model and I was like, okay, I'm going to retire in 10 years. This is how I'm going to do it.
So what happened that you built it on the way home from Australia?
Well, I was there. I was traveling around and I was sitting on a beach in Australia. And it's, I don't know, I don't know if you've been to Australia or what, but like a lot of the beaches, they're not private, but they seem private because they don't have as many people, you know. And so I was married at the time, and my wife was from Australia, and so we were going there every year. And but I could only get like a very small amount of time off of work at one time. I had quite a bit of vacation time, but because of my position, I couldn't be away from the trading floor for a certain amount of time. And I was answering phone calls on the beach, and I thought, "Oh my god, here I am," right? Because even when I was at home, like I would answer phone calls on lunch, like it was just that was my whole life. And this, I heard this rustling in the back, like the brush, like behind where we were sitting, and I'm like, "Oh God, who is this? Is this like a person that's sitting back there, or what?" That's like your first reaction, right? And then, of course, like this kangaroo comes out, and it just, hops down. And then I'm like looking at it, and my wife's going, "There's no way this kangaroo is going to come up to us because they don't like people." Of course, it did. It came right up to us, and we were eating Cheetos, and I held my hand out, and this kangaroo literally took its like tiny little paw and took the Cheeto out of my hand. I was mesmerized. I could not believe that. It's like almost like a movie where it was like slowed down, like moment in time. And I thought, oh my God, this wild animal basically chose its own version of freedom. Like it hangs out here at the beach and comes down and gets cheese and crackers from people or whatever, you know? And so I was like, what am I doing? I have full reign here. I have full choice. And yeah, I was so inspired by it that I just, I couldn't wait. So on the way home, I built the financial model. But then I kind of about 3 years into the whole plan, I was making it work. I was investing in stocks, and I was also buying real estate after the financial crisis in San Diego. I picked up quite a bit of real estate, which helped a lot. Um, but then I became really, really just depressed. I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I felt like I was like living inside of a spreadsheet. Like my whole life was numbers. And I just worked all the time or studied for a financial exam. And I thought, I cannot, I don't know if I can make it through this. And then there was an Indian guy who joined our group. His name was Amit, and he and I became fast friends. We had the same sense of humor, and he started bringing me all these books on spirituality from India, like all these like ancient spiritual masters. And he started explaining to me like what they were trying to talk about and all this stuff. Well, I just basically got so oriented on that that what ended up happening is I ended up starting a business and then donating a lot of the profits. So I was already kind of moving into a whole spiritual world while still building the wealth plan, and which is why I teach money the way that I do now, because it's actually what worked for me. It's kind of what saved me, because I just wasn't motivated by just the money.
So, how does spirituality connect with money and finances? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, the example that just referred to with the business. So at the time, no one really knew what a vacation rental was, and so we were buying property, and so we decided. We said, well, let's just try this thing. There were three in San Diego at the time, and we said, let's just try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then I remember saying one morning, I said, okay. Because we were also really into like horses, because I ride horses. I have horses now. I said, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do it different. Let's do it completely, like, it doesn't have to be all about the business. Let's do it like as part of our own value system and part of our why, because I wanted to stay energetically connected to it. So I said, let's give away a portion of the proceeds to horse rescues. Well, make a long story short, this vacation rental ended up, I mean, doing great. It ended up we met people from all over the world. People were leaving envelopes of cash in the place for us to give to horse rescues. Still, there are 8 wild Mustangs that are running free in Idaho because of this place, and it was just literally just life changing. To me, that is the merging of the energy of money and the spiritual aspect, because it's really the calling forth of you. It's you showing up as the authentic you, but then there's an underlying business or asset that's being built that is sort of fueling the whole thing. See, I couldn't have planned it out that way. Like, I couldn't have planned to meet all the people. I couldn't have planned to save the horses. I did as much as I could do. And then I opened myself to it. And then what happened is universally those things stepped in.
So this is the part I struggle with, right? Because there's a lot of people who are out there who talk about this, but I still think you have to take action, right?
Oh, yeah, you
It's
do.
not like I just come up with this idea and I magically it all works out, right? At least I'm thinking that's the case.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point too. And I actually think even just what you're talking about here is an indicator that we are moving into a whole brand new conversation. I would say we're moving into more of an advanced conversation with money. I think what we were seeing before was, a lot of people were talking about the energy of money. You've got manifestation, you've got all these conversation, mindset, money mindset, all this stuff out. And I think that we're beyond that in that we realize that, yeah, you can feel good about money, but if you're still sitting on the couch, it's not going to make any difference. Right. And so you're exactly right about combining the action to it. However, a lot of people are not actually going to do the action step unless they feel better before. So it is important that we're doing that work and had that conversation. But I think the advanced conversation that we're getting into now is how do you actually bring the energy of money, all of these concepts that you're learning, and a lot of people really do enjoy learning about the energy of money. How do you pull that down into what I would consider here? We've got the 3D world and really use the tools to your advantage. Like I used the tools of a rental, a vacation rental. That was a tool in order to do it. But the spirit behind it was the horses and the desire to create something new and different.
And that's what I was going to kind of ask you, like, what are these tools? But you're using practical money making tools. You're
Mm.
not using some other types of, I don't know what the right word would be for them, some type of mental tools. You're actually using solid core business principles, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm using the mental tools as well, the conscious creation and all of that, because the conscious creation gives you the accelerated route. But the business tools have to be an aspect of it because the reality is we live in this world. And so it's just like you can't actually expect to go to the store in your car if you don't put gas in it. It's kind of the same thing.
So when you say conscious creation tools, can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So everything outside of us, all the things that we're seeing right now are just a result of the thoughts that we have because the thoughts are directing the decisions that we have. And a lot of people know this and I think are waking up even more so to this. The thing is, I think in the new, I'll say the new paradigm, because I do feel like that we've entered kind of a whole new world. If you look at that's why the conditioning and the money beliefs and stuff, it doesn't really work anymore because we don't live in our parents' economy anymore. This is a very different economy, right? So we're now in this whole new paradigm. And so really the ultimate currency is our energy. And so what we're doing is we're trading energetic currency for time. We're trading it for money. Everything is just a trade. And so what we're doing is we're starting to now value our energetic currency more, which is why people are feeling less happy in their corporate situations, or even just a situation where if you have to go and sit somewhere for 8 hours and do something that doesn't use your mind, or we're starting to sort of buck the system a little bit with this, and we're wanting our time back a lot more. It's no accident that so many people are feeling like that all at once. There's a reason for that, and it's because it doesn't fit anymore. So when I say conscious creation, what I'm really talking about is the responsibility that we are creating every single thing in our world. And I know that's a hard pill for people to swallow sometimes. But unless we take responsibility for something that's happened, we actually cannot create something because we don't get to say, I'm the creator of everything. but yet I don't like these people in my life over here who are like doing all these things that I'm just pissed off about, right? We have to do both, or else you're going to be like very hypocritical in the situation. So it's like, where it's like the power of awareness, where are these thoughts going? Am I spending 80% of my day thinking about things that I don't want? Because a lot of people are.
It's funny. I was listening to Michael Singer this morning, and he's like, most people are not listening to what other people are saying.
Mm,
He said, somebody starts to say something, and then your mind kicks in and it starts telling you all these thoughts about what they said or what it assumes they're saying. And it's putting all these conversation is. And next thing you know, you're not listening to the person. You're listening to you and your filter
mhm,
and how you've kind of recreated this whole scenario in your head. And that sounds very similar to what you're saying.
mhm. Yes, we do. Listening is actually a very important part of creation because typically we're just waiting on someone to stop talking. That's just what we do,
So
right?
we can say what we've already been thinking about instead of listening.
Yes, exactly. And it's just exactly like you said. Like, we do this with money all the time, right? So you meet someone, you want to do, let's say you want to do a business transaction with them or something. You go to dinner, maybe you have a Zoom call or something. You're looking for things that are going to be indicators why you should or you shouldn't do it. You're not actually open. I mean, very, very rarely. I do think that we're learning this more so. And if we're not open, then it's like a teenager that doesn't listen to the parent. It's like you're missing so much wisdom if you're not open, but we don't realize that.
So, how do we master energetic currency?
Well, I mean, we're consciously creating all the time. It's just we're consciously creating a lot of the time what we don't want. So I would say the mastery of it, I think, in this framework would be, am I creating the things that I want? And so the first step that you have to do that is you have to be aware. Okay, you have to catch yourself. Am I thinking, did I just get caught in the record player of what my neighbor Steve was just talking about this morning that really, pissed me off, right? It's something like that. You have to be able to catch yourself with that. Um, and I think that you have to actually know what you want. And I know this sounds crazy because a lot of people think that they know what they want, but do you know what you want based on what you think you can have and the circumstances are around you? Or do you really know what you want? I would say the difference would be if you were dropped from a spaceship today and you were dropped down on Earth and you sort of, after the dust settles, you sort of look up and you look around, and someone said to you, the only thing that you have to do is follow whatever makes you happy and just go out and help people. I think that people would have a very different set of goals and wants and all of that because the rest of the muck and the world would have been taken away. So I think that that would be coming from their true authentic self. I think that sometimes when people say what they want, they're like, yeah, well, I want a new car, but I don't need this car. I just need this smaller car or whatever. Like we're always downsizing. But I think at the end of our lives, we have to realize that why? We're not getting any extra credit for that. No one's giving you extra credit for being small. In fact, the bigger you are, the more you get to do in the world and the more people you get to help.
What percentage of people do you think actually know what they want?
Well, I could base this on running the Spiritual Investor Program for 7 years, and I would say maybe 15, 20%. I'm saying truly, truly. You get a lot of people who they're like, yes, I want $30 million. But then they don't really want to be that human who would do the things that they need to do to go get $30 million. So there's a disconnect.
And I think that is the most important thing is, are you willing to do the work for that?
Hmm.
Because I think, as you said, most people aren't. And I think, I would guess, most people's wants aren't necessarily their wants.
Hmm. I would agree. Yeah.
They're programming that maybe they picked up, or there's something they seen or something they heard about.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's not something that they truly want, or they haven't thought it through. Have you noticed that with your students?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's part of what I do help them do is peel back the layers and ask them the questions because sometimes, it's kind of like an emotion. Sometimes we feel a certain emotion and the emotion comes up in our body, but it really has nothing to do with what's going on in the outside world. It's just that we were taught to associate something with that emotion when we were a child. And so there's a disconnect, right? It's like the interpretation is off. So I think that when it comes to people knowing what they want, I think the interpretation is off in terms of are you telling the world what you really want? Are you telling the world the version that you think is still like righteous and spiritually accepted and humble and all of these things that we want? Because it really comes down to, I think what we want is limited by our current self identity. So it's never what we truly want.
And so the question that comes up, though, is it, when you say we're limited, is it limited from a, and I don't know what the right word would be. In other words, saying, I want a private airplane. Like,
Mhm.
people all want a private airplane. Not everyone, but, I don't really think people want a private airplane.
Mm.
I think they want something else, but they think the private airplane is going to give it to them. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, it does make sense. It does.
How many people are looking for the airplane versus what they really want?
Mm.
Or
Well,
can they discern that? And how do you?
I think I think there's kind of like, there's the what's in our consciousness, because that's what we're creating now. And so whenever we say what we want, and this is kind of going on a little bit over into the energy of money fringes here, right? There's a spiritual teaching that says that those who like if the poor person who prays for riches doesn't get riches, they actually get more of being poor. And so the reason is because when a poor person prays for riches, what's in their consciousness is they are poor. And so if we're always getting what we want, then they're actually getting more of being poor because they see themselves as a poor person, which goes back to our conscious creation. So a lot of people are saying, I want the airplane, but they're not seeing themselves as the person who could get the airplane. So then they're not actually going out there and doing the things or being the person or having the conversations. Even when the opportunity comes up, I see a lot of people self sabotage. A lot of people will go up
Mm.
to that higher frequency and then they do everything possible to self sabotage to get back down to it, right? So we're creating based on our consciousness now, but we're reaching for things that are beyond the level that we are now. But are we energetically connected to that? That's why when you talk about the energy of money, that's why every teaching says the exact same thing. It says you have to feel it. And the reason is because if you don't feel like that, then you can't actually create it.
And that makes sense. What I see is everybody wants the lottery ticket. They don't want to do the work, right? They're looking for it to be handed to them, which means they're not at that level. And I've heard people have their own money temperature, which is why people who win the lottery, when they get all the money, they lose it all within a short period of time because they're not in tune with having that kind of money. It makes them uncomfortable,
It's not in
even
their
though they said they wanted it and they bought the ticket, right? So it's that back and forth. how do we change our money frequency to be in tune with that higher level?
You have to focus, you have to stop focusing on lack and scarcity. So lack and scarcity is a different frequency. And so like a lot of people, they'll read something about the energy of money. Let's say you read like a book or something and you feel great about it. Well, then you go to the grocery store and you suddenly just pick the jar of pickles that's $1 less, or you get stressed at the cash register because you're swiping your credit card and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in debt, right? So what's happening is you go to one frequency, but then life, you go out in life in this whole 3D world and you're still in lack and scarcity. So you're falling down to this frequency. Well, you actually have to change your perspective. You have to change the way that you're looking at this in order to change the consciousness, because you're basically trying to spend more time in on the frequency that contains the opportunities that's going to bring that higher level of money to you, but you have to do it in an energetically consistent manner, which is why you can't just go do the feel good stuff. You have to actually go out there in the world and use the tools in a different way, because you have to be on that frequency for a certain amount of time.
And that's kind of where I'm like, you can't just go out to the store and start spending money like crazy, right?
Mhm.
Because that in and of itself is going to make you poor until the money shows up. And I see people really struggle with this. I think they have misconceptions of how this comes together.
I agree with you. I think that this is actually one of the most misunderstood areas out there, is how do you actually take this energy of money, which even for people who are just like sort of scratching the surface with this, there are certain things that they're kind of like resonating with, like maybe something will sound right to them or something, and then you've got people who just, they're into it all. But I think that's one of the biggest things, is how do you actually merge this with everyday life and the circumstances and having to pay rent and the credit card debt and needing to invest for kids and things like that. How do you do it? How do you also make a big change in your life, like not trading time for money? That's a big thing. I think that people are really wanting to sort of get out of that right now. And um in my opinion, to live in this world and to do it in the accelerated way, you have to combine the two.
And I know a lot of beliefs hold people back. Um, I deal with business owners all the time, and it's like, oh, nobody will pay for that, or because they're putting their own money values on other people, is what I notice. And we have to help them overcome themselves to fix their pricing problems. And it's a classic example of that. So, practically, how do we do this? If somebody comes to you and they're at one level, like, is there a step by step way they get to this next level, or how does that practically work?
Well, a lot of it depends on, let's say what's blocking them first, because like sometimes, like, I mean, I said, I grew up with entrepreneurs, so money really kind of feels good to me, so then I would start with maybe a different area when it comes to money. I've worked with a lot of people who, like, they grew up not even being able to afford, like, even to buy a soda at the store when they were a kid, or they just couldn't. They were very, very poor. So then you're going to start at a different level with them. But ultimately, it's all going to circle back to the energy of money. It's going to circle back to money management. And in my opinion, you never do money management from a place of lack and scarcity, always from abundance. And then the third is expanding money and investing. The reality is we can't save our way into freedom anymore. We don't live in that economy. The cost of living is too high, and we can't buy houses for $100,000 anymore. If you aren't using investing, then in my opinion, the people who aren't, they're falling behind, because the investing is actually the tool that actually helps you keep up. Not only that, but as you're building an investing account, you're buying your way out of having to go out and trade more time. And I think people are waking up to the fact that they want the optionality of having investing as their second income.
And I'm familiar with the FIRE crowd. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but that's a big part of what they do. But it tends to be that most of those people, I'm not going to say they lucked into, but they happen to have high paying jobs. Many of them. And honestly, the key to that whole thing is to spend less than you earn. I mean, that's just basic math,
Mhm.
and invest the difference. And if you'll do that, it tends to work out. Um, that's more of a basic money, though. But I guess it's the behaviors behind actually making that happen, because a lot of people want to do it, but they don't.
Well, you got to think about like a lot that goes on in that crowd. It's a I won't say all of it, but I will say there is an undertone of sacrifice.
Hmm.
And I think, like when I, left corporate, so I did my own early retirement. I basically covered my cost of living and I completed my long-term retirement. Those were the two boxes I wanted to check when I was 39. And I said, okay, after that, I'm not going to be flying private jets around. I'm still going to work and I'm still going to do all these cool things in life. But that was my version of financial freedom. I think everybody needs to have their own version of it. What I didn't want to do is I didn't want to put on a backpack and travel around the world. And I did nothing wrong with that. I did that at 26. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to still live in a nice house. I wanted to still, drive a nice car. I ride horses. I was competing on horses. You talk about expensive, right? So I wanted to still be able to do all of that, right? So I wasn't your typical person with regards to any of that. My thinking on it and the way that I did it and the way I teach it is that you can do both because we live in an and world. You can actually be doing what you want to do for a living and actually calling in the amount of money that you need for living and for investing and doing what you want. There's no sacrifice involved.
But if there's no sacrifice, you're still going to have an excess of cash. So then it's a question of how do you build the excess cash?
Well, you don't have to be miserable to build the excess of cash.
No, you don't have to be miserable, but I think you also have to have a skill set.
Yeah. But that could be something you love doing.
Oh, I understand that totally. And I think you can take what you So here's the thing, and I do this in my life. If you love what you're doing, over time you're naturally going to, and I'll use the word beat everyone else. It's probably not the right word,
Mm.
but you're going to, because when you've got 10 extra minutes, you're going to put your energy into doing it better. Whereas a person who's doing it for the money is going to go home or go do something else or go do what they love instead of investing the time, the effort, the love of doing it into that. So you're naturally going to keep going where others will stop, which then naturally makes you better. Um, the problem is not everything, maybe it does. And that is one of the things that I've always kind of been back and forth on. They say follow your passion. Some passions may not be what the world is willing to reward. And so how do you find that balance, so to speak?
Well, you've just given us a perfect example of what we were talking about, which is money frequency. So, what you just described is the person who has the extra 10 minutes who loves it. They're on a different frequency. We feel different around them. We know they're in it because they actually want to be here. And then you describe the person who's not, who's just maybe doing it for a job or, whatever. I just need to get the money or da da da. That's on a different frequency. So it is what do you want to do and what can you do that's on that frequency is more important actually than anything because it's just exactly like you said and you've been talking about. The whole follow your bliss thing is more about frequency than it is specifically what you're going to do. Because going back to what we talked about earlier, I find that sometimes people They'll choose a business that they think is going to work, that they think is going to be marketable or is going to make them money, or that they've seen their cousin, do well in, or something like that. And then they talk themselves into, oh, I can do this. Well, this would be better than what I'm doing. Da da da. They're just kicking the can down the road. That's just another unsustainable thing that's going to keep them 3 to 5 more years in a lower frequency. And I'm always looking for the accelerated route. And I think most entrepreneurs are. Just give me the most accelerated route, and then I'm going to achieve that. I'm going to go above and beyond, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing and the next thing.
So how do you know which is the accelerated path? Because if you're not used to that, or you haven't worked through that, or you don't even know how to evaluate it, how do you know what the most accelerated path is?
Because it feels effortless.
Mm.
Yeah. When you back in 2021, I had a major line, drew a line in the sand with my entire life, and it started with my business. And I said, I will only do things in my business that feel effortless. Now, that doesn't mean, it feels effortless in the beginning. You come out with a new product, you've got to build it, you've got to do, all this. But there is a path to effortless, and it is moving in that direction. And we can tell, no different than we're in a relationship. We can kind of tell when things are starting to go south, right? Are we ignoring the red flags and staying in the relationship? Or are we saying, okay, right? This is like, we know we have more answers than we actually give ourselves credit for. So effortless, if you're following the path for effortless, then you're always moving in the right direction, because life should be effortless. Those conversations we find ourselves in that we feel magical, that we're like, oh my gosh, I feel like you're a lifelong friend. That's the way that we can feel in every single aspect of our life.
Why do most people ignore red flags? Because you always hear them say that afterwards. They're like, oh, I ignored all the red flags that were there.
Mm-hmm. People ignore red flags because of attachments. So, an example would be someone could be in a relationship and they're ignoring a red flag because staying is easier than being alone on a Friday and Saturday night, right? There's always behind it. There's always an attachment, meaning you're getting a secondary gain. You just haven't uncovered that. That's invisible to you. And we do the exact same thing with money. We do the exact same thing. So we're like, okay, yeah, it would be great to have $1 million. But then in the back of their mind, they're thinking, yeah, but people who have millions of dollars, they're kind of greedy, or I never really liked those people, or those people have to work harder than I do. There's always something going on in the background. So they're attached to this part of their self-identity that doesn't want to change. And that's going to keep them on that frequency.
How, as you go through these frequency changes, can you do it quickly, or do you have to kind of go from one to the next and get comfortable and then move to the next?
It's dependent on how willing you are to go all in. So what happens is you can shift in an instant, but then what happens is at that point, you've just told your mind, okay, I'm different now. What you have to do is you actually have to go out into the world and experience all of these scenarios that are going to bring that attachment back into your face. It's going to be a mirror reflection back to you. The acceleration factor comes not from the circumstance that you're faced with. It comes from, how are you going to act in that moment? Are you going to act like the lower frequency, the older version of you? Or are you going to step into it and act like that version who's like, yeah, I'm going to have $1 million this year? Then you get the acceleration factor, because what happens is you go through it that again and again and again. And this is when you get the feeling where you're like, wow, I don't recognize that old version of me. And this has happened to everyone. Like, 6 months later, you're like, wow, I don't even think about doing that anymore. Right. Because you've sort of mastered the game in the experience.
Yeah, I was just listening to one of our past guests, Alan Weiss, and he does consulting. And he's like, as you move up the consulting ladder, the biggest thing you have to learn is to shut and seal the door behind you.
That's
Meaning,
great.
you move up
Yeah.
to another frequency level, you have
Yes.
to make sure that that door behind you is locked tight. You can't go backwards. And I think too often we slide back down. And the moment you slide back down, it's very easy to get comfortable in the old place again.
Very easy. Yes, it's tricky because sometimes we feel like more of ourselves when we're sliding back to that comfort level, you know?
Do you have any tips on how to stay and not slide back?
Let me think of, like, from myself. So, from my experience, where it starts with me is I will feel an emotion come up that is sort of kind of prodding me to do something that I've decided I'm not going to do anymore. Right. We can think of something simple, like if you're trying to not watch TV or something at night. Oh, an emotion's going to come up, or a reason, or someone's mentioned this great show or whatever. If you can catch it there, it's kind of like catching the car at the top of the hill before it actually goes down, like it has all the momentum, then you can actually make a shift. But if you get into it and you sort of don't catch it there and you get into it, then what's happening is you're going to have to deal with the fact that you went into the old self. So you didn't shut the door in that example. And then what comes up for a lot of people is, oh, here, I did it again. I'm not worthy. I feel guilty. Oh, I can't do this, da da da. And then what happens is it just gets even worse and worse. So I think that it always comes back to full and complete awareness
In the moment.
in the moment.
Yeah, and most people I think are asleep in the moment.
We
We've
are.
had episodes on that.
Yeah,
And waking up and being intentional. With the people that you've worked with in the past, what are some of the biggest roadblocks you've seen people face?
definitely getting out of the circumstances of where they are now. I think that I see a pattern, really. So people, they want something different. They're tired of feeling the way that they're feeling because it's exhausting. It's affecting people's relationships. It's affecting people's health. Um, it's, I mean, it, it's infringing on the way that we feel about money and our circumstances with money is actually infringing upon our life and even the way that we feel about ourselves. And I think people are just sick of it. So I see people where they're they're focused on their circumstances, what they haven't done. They haven't all the regrets that they have. They should have started invested 10 years ago. Oh, they have debt now. They need to buy a new car. It's something, whatever. And this is people that even have a lot of money. You're still going to get people that are scared. They're scared. A lot of people who have a lot of money are scared they're going to lose the money. So you're going to get all of these fears, right? It's everybody's got the fear. It's just going to be just dressed differently. And so you have to actually address that first. Once you can address that, what it's like is there's a space that opens, and it feels a lot like when you just take a really deep breath. It's only when that space opens can any new answers come in. So if I start talking to you about investing and all the things that I think you should do with your money, and you're still in that frenzied state, you're not going to hear a word that I've said. It's like we're talking about earlier. The conversation is you're blocking, 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 blocking. So when people come into the spiritual investor program, it's always an opening. It's always a feeling better. It's always that point of ease. But the time is always now. So you are also taking the 3D action and doing the things from the very beginning. It might be something small, like maybe buying one stock. It might be making that phone call to the person that you haven't made the phone call to or something. You see what I'm saying? It's in tandem. You're building the new version of you. You're living on that frequency all at the same time. And I think that once you do that, what I see from people is that they start to actually believe in themselves. So it's like they kind of rely on me to believe in them first. And I carry that for them, and I love it. I love carrying it for them. Let me help you on this. But it's kind of like then the training wheels are off. And then they really don't need that anymore from me. They've got their own knowledge and they've got their own momentum, and they finally feel like they're powerful with money. It's really beautiful. It's really beautiful to watch, actually.
So, what do you do if you go through this transformation, but your spouse or your friends and your family aren't? Because
Hmm.
that's going to start to create friction and disconnection. What do they do with that?
Well, that is just another example of that experience that they have to go through. So whether it's a spouse or whether you don't have a spouse, what you can't do is you can't put too much emphasis on the fact that it's a spouse versus, not having a spouse or whatever. What you have to do is you have to say, this is the life I've created. I'm 100% responsible for the life I've created. I have benefited in some way from having this person in my life and this life and all of that. There's been a beautiful things that have come out of it. Right now, this is simply a mirror, a reflection back. I know what I want. I want to be a multimillionaire, and I want to do it in an effortless way. That's what I want. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do the work on your own. You're going to do these things. And what you're going to do is you're going to show up and you're going to express that. You're going to have those conversations without trying to convince someone, without bringing someone over. Because anytime you're trying to convince someone of something, you're giving your power.
And that makes sense. And you can't convince them because they're on their own path, so to speak. What other ways have you noticed that people give their power away?
Hmm. I think when it comes to money, I think that people give their power away, either thinking that they don't have enough knowledge to make good decisions with money. Um, People hold off on investing because they feel like they don't know what to do. That's definitely giving your power away. I think you can also get so into the details and the numbers that you're giving your power away as well, because then your whole self identity becomes about check boxes, and you're not letting that creative imagination aspect of money come into your life. I think that's giving your power away. I think the language that people use around money is giving their power away. Even using the word, this is expensive. Expensive for who? Right? You're already putting yourself in a box. Like, there's no need to do that anymore. What money is a flow. So whatever money goes out, the exact amount of money will come back in unless you don't want it and you're blocking it. That's why you see people go back to the same amount of money. Most people make the same amount every month. That's why you mentioned lottery winners. That's why they lose it all, because the amount of money that people are comfortable with is their consciousness. And we always revert back to it unless we're going beyond our own consciousness.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I've learned to listen to what people say. And based on what they say, I'm like, oh, look at all those money scripts. Now, I don't
Yeah.
challenge them or question them.
Yeah.
I'm just like, interesting,
Yeah.
interesting, interesting. Um, and you get to see how people behave. And yeah, it is quite revealing, but you have to listen.
You do. You have to listen. And I'll go back to, because this is important. And I know for some people, this is probably like, okay, this is just woo woo stuff or whatever. You do have to feel like that other person. And we understand this fully in sports. Like, if you don't feel like you can make the 3-point shot, you're not going to make the 3-point shot. You got to feel that first, right? We so understand it when it comes to that. But if you can apply that to your money, I mean, I see it happen in my life all the time. In fact, it's happening to me right now. I am already consciously creating, and I've been doing this for the last 2 months, consciously creating my next level. And I just met with my CPA right before I got on this call. I literally had a 15-minute break where I went and sat outside in the sun. And my CPA is like, do you know how much money you've already made this year? I'm like, really? I'm so grateful, but here's the thing. It's not a linear relationship. You create the feeling. I had a feeling already that I was doing even better than I've ever done, right? I had that feeling, Rocky, but I didn't need to go out and see the evidence. I already had, this is a standard set meeting that I have with my CPA once a week. And that just happened to be brought up. And it happened, and now I get to share the story with you. Do you see how this happens? It's just one thing, one thing, one thing. And it's not really any work for me. It feels effortless to talk about this stuff
Why do you meet with your CPA once a week?
because I run multiple businesses and I've got a lot of different things that I've got big goals. Yeah.
And so they're helping to keep you on track financially.
That, and we talk about strategy, and we talk about, she's also a really good friend, and so we sometimes we spend half the conversation just talking about that. And by having the once a week meeting, you know what it does, because I travel a lot and so does she. What it does is it allows us to freely go, hey, I can't meet this Thursday. And that's become kind of the norm. I'd say probably 30-40% of the time maybe we don't meet. That way we end up meeting at least twice a month, and we end up being able to, it to me, what it does is it helps me actually orient and make decisions proactively rather than react, which I don't think there's a reason for me to make reactive decisions.
No, in business you can forecast a lot. In your personal life you can forecast a lot.
Mm,
And you just have to sit down and think about what's coming and looking at situations. And that's why I'm always amazed. Oh, I had an emergency. What was your emergency? I needed new tires. Oh, you needed new tires. Yeah, well, they had 60,000 miles on them.
right.
They've been bald. You
Mhm,
knew it was coming.
mhm,
The heating system was 20 years old. These are not emergencies. Had you actually sat down and thought about it,
mhm,
you could predict all of this with very little thought and go, okay, at some point this needs replaced, or a kid's going to college,
mhm,
or these different life milestones are going to happen,
mhm,
and you need to be able to pay for them. One day you're going to get sick. You might end up in a hospital. It's going to happen, right? These
mhm.
different things in life always occur. They shouldn't be emergencies. They should just be kind of expectations. And when you look at it that way, I think it makes it a lot easier.
You're right. Even just talking about it, like it should be a point of ease because it comes back to a responsibility, that again, we're creating our world. So we're creating the fact that we're getting a secondary benefit from ignoring that the tires have 60,000 miles on them. We're getting a benefit from that. And we're just not being real with ourselves. And I think we have to call bullshit on ourselves sometimes and say, hey, I knew that. I've been driving cars for a lot of years. I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great example though.
Well, and so many things. I mean, some things in life take a long time to get to, and retirement's one of them. And it's amazing how many people never save for retirement until way late in the game. Um, you knew it was coming because it was either that or you were dropping dead.
Right.
Right? or you plan on working till whenever, which I do. But even though I want to work forever, I don't want to have to work. So I want a fund so that I don't have to. I get them have the money to say no, thank you, and
Yes.
gives me that freedom.
Yeah,
It's not to
exactly.
say
You want to have the option.
you want the
And
options.
it's shocking to me how easy it is to invest and how many people don't see it as, a way to expand their time, because any money that you get through investing is just less money you have to go out there and actually earn yourself.
Well, correct. It's allowing you to make money off of other people's efforts instead of your own. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, even real estate in a sense is doing that. You talked about having a rental real estate.
Hmm.
It's a way of creating, we call it passive income, and passive
Hmm.
isn't totally passive, but along the lines of passive. And you don't have to spend as much time in it. Is there anything we should have talked about but didn't get a chance to?
No, I think, hopefully this has been helpful for people in terms of maybe bringing these two worlds together. It's something that you can do. Um, it can still be your own flavor. It can still feel like you. We can go so far into the side of the woo woo stuff, or we can just incorporate a little bit of this into the 3D world. I would just encourage people to play with it a little bit. You might as well. I mean, you might as well just be open and sort of do a little bit of discovery in this area. I would say it's not going to hurt. And I will say, uh, I've s- I've seen so many incredible results when people step into the responsibility of actually truly living as that person who has that same desire for what they want, right? So you want the $1 million. Are you living as that person now?
Basically, living in alignment with what you want. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in order to do that, I do think that you have to have a high level of awareness. But I think most people want to show up and do good things in the world. And I would say the people who have a very high level of awareness, you mentioned listening and things like that, you are able to show up better in the world by practicing the things we talked about here today, and it brings you more money. So that's the thing. It's a double win in my mind.
Yeah, I like the word and for everything. People are like, should I
Mhm,
do this or that? I'm like,
mhm.
and
Yeah, yeah,
it's
definitely.
bringing it all together.
Yes, for sure, for sure. And I go pretty heavily into the energy of money on, the Spiritual Investor podcast. It's a lot of the students listen to it as well because they want to stay in that, you talk about a frequency. So what they do is they utilize it. It's about 20, 30 minutes, and they utilize it to kind of get back in the energy of money. And I'll give you tools and kind of go throughout your day and things like that. So whether it's me, whether it's you have amazing people on this podcast, somebody, or someone else that you resonate with, I think the key is, are you doing something different today than you did yesterday?
Otherwise, tomorrow will be the same as yesterday. It's your secret to living an abundant life.
uh Awareness, because I'm aware of all of the amazing things around me.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That's tough because I don't have any regrets
And
ever.
this isn't about
And
regrets.
let's see, what did I learn later in life that I wish I'd learned sooner? Things don't take as long as I originally thought that they did. Like the wealth plan I did, I set it for 10 years. I actually did it in 8. I could have done it in 6 easily.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Invest $500 a month in the market.
If people would like to learn more about you, your programs, your podcasts, where can they find you?
ElizabethRalph.com. So just my first and last name. The Spiritual Investor Podcast. You can, search that one. On Instagram as well. So it's just my name, Elizabeth Ralph. I do, a lot of videos on Instagram. Like I said, the podcast is all about the energy of money. The Spiritual Investor Program. So that's a group program. We've got an amazing spiritual community. And I run a mastermind as well, where I work with you 2 hours a week, and I'm just kind of your guide. And really, you're not going to have anything on your money to do list then, because I'll be watching.
That is awesome. And we'll put that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Rocky. This has been great.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.